Marco Rossi 1C, Calen Addison on the second D pair. We discuss optimal lineups on today's episode of Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. If you are a first-time listener, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Wild on your favorite podcast platforms and on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the course of the week. If you're an everydayer who tunes in each and every day of the week, we are glad to have you back on today's show. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Jayden Homuth joins us as we discuss the optimal lineup for the Minnesota Wild. We'll take a look at some potential options on the top line, on defense, and otherwise on today's show. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. We are joined, as mentioned, by Jayden Homuth. And Jay, it's been a minute since we have had you on the show, but no better time to bring you back on than Locked On Wild Boot Camp. How are things going?
They're going pretty good. I don't know if you guys all saw I'm yawning. I'm in the middle of fall camp my own self down in Virginia, so that's why I've been on a little bit of a break, but it's always hard. I finally got a little bit of a window now, so I was texted you right away. I could hop on, but yeah, so the days are from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. East Coast time, so a little tired. Not everyone. I'm always tired now, so getting this little appearance is pretty good. Probably will make the week finally switch up the things, not the same schedule.
Yeah, just a little bit of a change up. That's what we always like. So we're going to discuss the lineup as we've been going through some of the bigger picture items for Locked On Wild Boot Camp to start, and then we'll narrow our focus as we go throughout the next couple of weeks. So we're talking about the lineup, and I wanted to start by discussing the top line because you've got Kirill Kaprizov, you've got Matt Zuccarello, you have Ryan Hartman, who has been the 1C for the last couple of seasons. Are you entertaining the idea of making a change to, for instance, put Marco Rossi in that top position to at least see what he has in that spot, or is it Ryan Hartman's job? And that's your story, and you're sticking to it.
I'm sticking with Ryan Hartman. Not only you could argue that last year he obviously wasn't who he was 2 years ago, but towards the end of the year, I think once you hit like mid-March to the playoffs, Ryan Hartman really turned it on, and I think anyone who watches the Minnesota Wild could agree with me. But the interesting thing is, I feel like every time I'm on the show, there's a topic about Rossi. So I love talking about him. But again, he hasn't even has had a goal yet. So I think maybe you could try to play him with Kirill maybe early in the season, but at the same time, I think Hartman continued. He got hurt in game one against Dallas, but Ryan Hartman continued to play good through that mid-March stretch all the way out. So it wasn't spotty. He was. It's not spotty because he was not good and then he was good. And we know that the year before he was really good. So I think that you could just keep rolling with Hartman, Zuccarello, and Kaprizov going into next year because we do not have a bona fide number one center. No matter who you look at, you can't just plug Rossi in there and expect him to score 30 goals. But I would stick with Hartman because it works. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. So.
Well, yeah, and you look at Hartman's numbers, and from February on, he had 10 goals. He had 12 goals, I beg your pardon. So 12 of his 15 goals came in 2023 and started the season with a ton of penalties, was just inconsistent, turning the puck over all the time, and so got bumped off that top line. When he came back on, it seemed like it went back to the form that we came to know with those three guys. And ultimately, my whole thing is we just need to see what we've got with Rossi, to just know where he slots in the lineup. And so maybe you give it a try, but it would be a safety blanket to know that if it doesn't work out, you've got Hartman, who is available and is able to step in on that top line. So maybe it's something that Dean tries, but I feel like we know better. I feel like we know that Dean's going to go with Kaprizov, Hartman, and Zuccarello from the start of the season, and just going to expect that those guys cook from game one on.
Yeah, that's what it's the safeguard. And when you're going into a season where you don't really, I wouldn't say they have expectations this year. You're just going to go with your safeguard. And Ryan Hartman, not only does he play well with those two, he's also such a buzzer. Like he can get the whole X going. I'll always remember that goal at the X in April against Bennington when he just kind of skated around him and just kind of waited and tucked it in. It was he's fun to watch, and I think that there's no reason to take him off the top line and put a guy who hasn't scored yet. I'm gonna dangle that carrot over everybody. I probably sound like a Rossi hater, but I'm not. I promise you I'm not. I love Rossi. I'm against anytime we've talked about trading him on the show or I'm there, I always say no. I just give it time. But at the same time, like you're not going to put him on. You don't give him first line minutes. You haven't done anything to deserve first line minutes.
Well, and the tough part too is that you look at that second line with Matt Boldy, Joel Eriksson-Ek, and Marcus Johansson, and you think, okay, well, maybe if you wanted to get Rossi a spot in the top six, you put him on the second line and you elevate Joel Eriksson-Ek. But that second line has been the last handful of games of the season in which they all played together. It was a lethal combination that the Wild were able to throw out on the ice when all three of those guys were healthy.
Yeah, the problem with Rossi is we drafted him the year that the draft was kind of weird, right? So if you were out in the qualifying round, you got a pick in the 1 through 9. So the bad teams necessarily didn't get those early picks. So he was put on a team where if you want to play in the top 6, you need to really, really, really deserve it. You need to earn it. It's not like he was picked by the Red Wings in 2020 where he probably wouldn't have been in the AHL at all. He'd probably still be a mainstay second, third line center on the Red Wings. So like look at Alexis Lafreniere. He went first overall to the New York Rangers that year. They're a really good team. He's been a third, fourth liner his whole career almost because he was thrown onto a team that already had enough talent. So I don't think that Rossi maybe got the fair end of that early draft pick deal where you can get bumped into the NHL right away. But at the same time, he's on a great team with a great chance to win, but you need to earn your way into that top 6. You're not just going to get handed that. So anytime people are like first line center, you're not going to bump Eriksson-Ek up to first, put Rossi onto the second, because where are you going to put Hartman? Hartman doesn't deserve to be a third line center. You're not going to put Eriksson-Ek down. Like it's the third line center, and even Freddie Gaudreau. Right now, everybody knows I'm a Freddie fan, but I'd take Freddie on the third line over Rossi. Freddie's a scorer; he can score. And then that fourth line, we have one of the best fourth lines in the league. So he's really got to play his way into this lineup. And I don't think you can just hand him a spot just because he was that 9th overall pick. He's really got to earn it. And we've seen him score all the time in the AHL, but we bring him up. He's quiet. So again, I'm going to dangle that carrot. I'm not a Rossi hater. I love the kid. I say kid like he's younger than me, but he's got to play his way into the Minnesota Wild lineup.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the third and fourth lines a little bit when we come back, as we continue to look at the optimal lineups for the Minnesota Wild. That is on the way after this here on today's episode of Locked on Wild. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get up to 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. If you're taking the Minnesota Twins, might want to go with the opponent and the over. That seems to be the most popular trend over the last handful of games. So just keep that in mind as you navigate through the next couple of weeks here betting on the Twins. And if you do so, it's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will continue Locked On Wild Boot Camp on Monday's show as we take a look at large at the fourth line. So make sure that you stay tuned as we gear you up for the start of the season. A couple of months from now, we'll have content every single day for you to gear you up for that. Jay Homuth joins us as we take a look at the optimal line combinations for the Wild. Let's talk third line. At this point, it looks like it's going to be Freddie Gaudreau, Marcus Foligno, and who do you think ends up getting that third spot in the lineup to fill things out?
This is another scenario where I think maybe you could slot Rossi in there because, Freddie is a good winger. He's also a good center. But if you needed to, I feel like you could slot Rossi in there and have Freddie and Johansson on the wings. But we're not going to go out and sign anybody. We can't. So it's going to be internal. Or I saw some on Twitter. I forgot who it was. I really wish I took a screenshot so I could credit you. But they said the Zucker Express will be very heavy this year, down 35 from Des Moines to St. Paul. And if Zucker was down in fourth. It's great. So the Zucker Express is what I'm going to start calling it now. But if you're watching and you said it, let me know. Hey, my Twitter's right there. I'll credit you. But because you got Beckman, Beckman. I feel like Beckman could play on the third line. To be honest with you, I liked what I saw last time I watched him was that game against Los Angeles in March. I think he had a goal. It was taken back. But I think Beckman is a solid guy too if someone can't find a touch. But we got a lot of good options that are in Iowa that could play on that third line. Because that fourth line really, with the two Deweys and Maroon, don't touch them, let them play, let them grind. Just let them be. Like, don't even those three are going to be so fun to watch.
Yeah, let's talk about that fourth line a little bit because Pat Maroon coming in and he is replacing Ryan Reeves. Reeves certainly was a personality for the Minnesota Wild, but do you think we see a little more production-wise from Pat Maroon in that same spot on the fourth line?
Yeah, and we're going to win the Stanley Cup too because it's Patrick Maroon, so he's on the roster. Start putting Minnesota Wild in there on the cup, but I like when I saw the Maroon trade and the when Reeves left and I saw the Maroon trade, it was essentially in my mind getting the same player but with more production. If Reeves and Maroon fought, Reeves is probably going to win, just because he's younger and he's way stronger. But Maroon's that same enforcer. He's got a bright personality. He's definitely a good locker room guy. And getting a locker room guy was very important if you were going to get an enforcer because obviously, I still pray every night that we bring Dumba back on a league minimum, but it's not going to happen. But you lost Dumba, you lost Reeves. That's hard locker room guys to replace. So getting someone like Pat Maroon on that fourth line is going to be great. And then keeping Duhaime was really good. And I hope that next year when he's a UFA, he stays. And obviously, Dewar is a great center on that fourth line.
Any thoughts to flipping Duhaime and if Rossi's going to be on the third line, putting Duhaime on the third and then putting Foligno on the fourth. So you get Foligno, Dewar, Maroon, the ultimate chaos fourth line.
That would be fun only because it wouldn't be fun because of Foligno and Maroon. Yeah, I think it would be funny because I think if you put anybody, whether they're 4'10" or 6'7", in between Maroon and Foligno on the ice, they're gonna play like they're 7-foot Goliath. So I feel like we would see a lot of Connor Dewar flying around doing some non-Connor Dewar things just because he knows that he could really get away with anything on the ice when he's got Foligno and Maroon out there with them. So, or like if we had Shaw, like I know Shaw will be back on the Wild. I don't like it's not like this is for anyone who's listening. I know he's not on the roster now, but he will be back on the Minnesota Wild. But you could put anyone there that you think is too little. Like I feel safe on the ice with Maroon and Foligno. I'm gonna go wreak some havoc. But and Duhaime's skilled enough to play on the third line. I think we've all seen it. The play that replays in my head is Washington last year, where he kind of went around a couple times and then hit that backhander, which he definitely closed his eyes with. But we'll give it to him. But I think Duhaime's a really skilled checking forward who can score, and that's really valuable in this league. So being able to keep him for another year is really important. He could play anywhere on the lineup. But that fourth line, putting Foligno there with Maroon would definitely get Dewar going, and that would be fun to watch for anybody.
It does feel like that bottom six is going to have a little bit of a purpose, but I'm an advocate for any time Duhaime can get elevated in the lineup for sure. So if we see that, I'm all in favor of it. And just selfishly, I would love to see Foligno and Maroon get an opportunity to be on the same line and just go hit people really hard. But we'll see, because ultimately it's Dean Evason's choice, and so we'll see what Dean puts out there for the lines. I did want to finish by talking about the defense, because there was a Locked On Wild listener submitted lineup pairing for defense that I thought was interesting. And so we will finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, make sure that you stick with us through Locked On Wild Boot Camp as we gear you up every possible question you need answered before the season starts. We've got you covered, so make sure that you stay with us at Locked On Wild over the next couple of months. Seth Topal joined by Jay Homuth. Let's talk defense, because there were a couple of people that suggested it. Travis is one. The potential to put Calen Addison higher in the lineup with Jonas Brodin. And here's the reasoning behind it. And it makes sense. Addison is not as good defensively, for sure. He's not John Klingberg, but he's not great defensively. And so needs some work there. So the thought process being Brodin is capable of covering for players that are not defensive defensemen. So you put Addison there, and then you put Brock Faber with the likes of Jon Merrill, because both of those guys are pretty responsible defensively. What do you think about the possibility of that lineup being thrown out by the Wild this year?
I think at the beginning of the year, Dean's probably going to go again with the safe card, and he'll probably take Brodin, Faber, Spurgeon, Middleton, and Merrill and Addison. But I think it'll be pretty quick to see that Addison, he's a specialty player. He's not going to be a lockdown defenseman. He's like a Scott Perunovich. He's a great power play quarterback, and that's valuable. You can't get rid of him just because he's bad at something. He's also really good at something. So, but it's not like you can just keep him on the bench only for power plays. So you've got to play him in defense. And I think that pairing him with someone more responsible defensively is going to be the way to go, just to grow his game too. I could see a Faber Merrill, because Faber, I feel like Faber could run his own pairing.
Yeah.
So having Faber and Merrill, if Merrill screws up, I think Faber's, again, he's only played a handful of NHL games, but I think he could be probably one of the best defensemen on the team, defense wise. And having Brodin and Addison together, that could maybe sharpen Addison's skills. Because I know last year there was complaints that Addison doesn't even go to anybody for help, or he doesn't even try to get better at defense. He only wants to worry about his offense. But maybe if you get him with someone who, like Brodin's had the same partner for so long. If he wants to really nosedive in on Addison and get him to sharpen his defensive skills, that would not only help Addison, but that would completely help the Minnesota Wild. So I do see that as a possibility. But I think Spurgeon Middleton's, that's locked up. That's going to be, they're not going to touch that. That's going to be a pairing. Or we could go with what I said last year, just sign a defenseman and let Addison be a winger. Because I was so happy when he was playing winger in Nashville. But because he loves his offense, but he's a defenseman, and I feel like he'll get there. He's still young. You can't give up on him yet. We gave up a big name player of this franchise to get him, at Jason Zucker. You can't give up on him yet. You got to give him time with someone to grow to. Because even, dang, I play, like everyone knows, I play Division I football, and I could go at it thinking I'm the greatest there is, but I have a 24-year-old big brother that still teaches me things every single day. There's never enough time to not learn. So with Addison, I feel like if you put him with someone like Brodin, and he gets with someone like Spurgeon, who's smaller like him in practice, but that's going to be up to Addison, obviously. So none of this, like we could talk about this forever, but if he doesn't want to do it, you can't. It's not going to happen. But
yeah, and I mean, you look at Spurgeon Middleton, and I think they've been a top 10 defensive pairing in terms of expected goals against since they were formed, which has been a large enough sample size to say, okay, that's pretty elite. And so it's a good show of faith, I think, too, for Faber, if they go that route, to say, hey, he's capable of running his own pairing, because I'm just going to say it right now. I think if you go Brodin and Faber on the second pairing and you go Addison and Merrill on the third, teams are going to try to pick on that third pairing pretty aggressively. And so unless you just try to shield their minutes and have Brodin, Middleton, Spurgeon, and Faber play like 25 minutes apiece, it makes sense to try to spread the wealth a little bit so that all of your D pairings are capable of being played, and you're not trying to prevent the opponent from picking on one as opposed to the others.
Yeah, honestly, I think the safeguard, I keep saying safeguard this episode, but I feel like the best way to do it would to probably put Addison in with someone like Brodin, because I think Jonas Brodin is the best defenseman on the Minnesota Wild. And if the Norris was given to the best defenseman who plays defense and doesn't score points, Jonas Brodin would have been a multiple-time Norris winner.
Yeah.
You always see these videos of Connor McDavid going coast to coast against every single NHL team. He's done it one time against the Minnesota Wild, and Brodin was not playing in that game. And I heavily believe that the only reason that has not happened is because Brodin's on the ice. Brodin is everything you want in an NHL defenseman, and I feel like if there's anyone in the roster to learn from for Addison, it's by playing with a top 10 defenseman, like defensive defenseman in the league.
Final thing, let's just talk goalies for a second. 50 starts for Gustafsson, 32 for Fleury. Any objection?
Nope. I think that you just signed Gustafsson to that 3-year deal. You start him game one. Why not? That's your guy this year. And I think Fleury's embraced the backup role now. I think he knows that Fleury's not stupid. He's a good guy, and he chose to stay here. He knows that they got an up and coming guy in Wallstedt coming. They struck gold with Gustafsson. I don't think last year he thought Gustafsson would be that good. I don't think anybody did. So he probably thought he would assume that starting role for maybe another 2 years, teach Wallstedt, but he's a real professional when it comes to the business side of hockey, and he understands that Gustafsson is a really good young breakout goalie, and he knows that he's a really good goalie too, but he's coming to that end, and he knows that he's here for one more year, and he can help Wallstedt if he needs it, and he can help Gustafsson if he needs it, and he's just gonna enjoy being in Minnesota one more year, and I don't think he has any objection only playing 30 games.
Me neither. Get your number one guy, the number one starts, and just let it ride from there. So that's a little bit of a look at what could be the optimal lineup. Ultimately, it's Dean Evason's choice, and so I feel like a lot of these things that we discussed probably won't happen, but it's good to put them out there just in the event that they do. We can say, hey, we talked about that. So now that today's episode is done, make sure that you subscribe to Locked On Wild on your favorite podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube, so you don't miss out on any new episodes, especially through Locked On Wild Boot Camp. We have all sorts of content coming for you over the next couple of months, so make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss out on any new episodes all week long as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.